Hello everyone, myself Akshita from Shri Venkateshwara College of Engineering. Today I am here to explain the topic about MVC Design Pattern. Contents Introduction, Components of MVC Design Pattern, Communication between the components, Example of MVC Design Pattern, Advantages, Disadvantages and Conclusion. Let's move into introduction. The Model View Controller (MVC) design pattern specifies that an application consists of a data model, presentation information, and control information. The pattern requires that each of these be separated into different objects. The MVC design pattern is a software architectural pattern that separates an application into three main components. They are model, view, and controller, making it easier to manage and maintain the code base. It allows for the reusability of components and promotes a more modular approach to software development. The MVC pattern separates the concerns of an application into three distinct components, each responsible for a specific aspect of the application's functionality. This separation of concerns makes the application easier to maintain and extend. Changes to one component do not require changes to the other components. Components of the MVC design pattern. Model. The model component in the MVC design pattern represents the data and business logic of an application. It is responsible for managing the application's data, processing business rules, and responding to requests for information from other components such as the view and the controller. Next component, view. It displays the data from the modeler to the user and sends user inputs to the controller. It is passive and does not directly interact with the model. Instead, receives data from the model and sends user inputs to the controller for processing. Next component, controller. Controller acts as an intermediary between the model and the view. It handles user input and updates the model accordingly, and updates the view to reflect changes in the model. It contains application logic such as input validation and data transformation. Communication between the components. This below communication flow ensures that each component is responsible for a specific aspect of the application's functionality, leading to a more maintainable and scalable architecture. User interaction with view. The user interacts with the view such as clicking a button or entering text into a form. View receives user input. The view receives the user input and forwards it to the controller. Controller processes user input. The controller receives the user input from the view. It interprets the input, performs any necessary operations such as updating the model, and decides how to respond. Controller updates model. The controller updates the model based on the user input or application logic. Model notifies view of changes. If the model changes, it notifies the view. View requests data from model. The view requests data from the model to update its display. Controller updates view. The controller updates the view based on the changes in the model or in response to user input. View renders updated UI. The view renders the updated UI based on the changes made by the controller. Now let's move into example of the MVC design pattern. So let's look into some of the examples. For model, it is student class. It represents the data, that is student's name and roll number, and provides methods to access and modify this data. View example is student view class. It represents how the data, that is student details, should be displayed to the user. Contains a method, that is print student details, to print the student's name and roll number. Controller example is student controller class. It acts as an intermediary between the model and the view. It contains references to the model and view objects, and it also provides methods to update the model, that is example set student name, set student roll number, and to update the view, that is update view. These are some of the examples of the MVC design pattern. Now let's move into advantages of the MVC design pattern. Separation of concerns. MVC separates the different aspects of an application, that is data, UI and logic, making the code easier to understand, maintain and modify. Modularity. Each component, that is model, view, controller, can be developed and tested separately, promoting code reusability and scalability. Flexibility. Since the components are independent, changes to one component do not affect the others, allowing for easier updates and modifications. Parallel development. Multiple developers can work on different components simultaneously, speeding up the development process. Code reusability. The components can be reused in other parts of the application in different projects, reducing development time and efforts. These are some of the advantages. Now let's look into disadvantages of the MVC design pattern. Complexity. Implementing the MVC pattern can add complexity to the code, especially for simpler applications, leading to overhead in development. Learning curve. Developers need to understand the concept of MVC and how to implement it effectively, which may require additional time and resources. Overhead. The communication between components can lead to overhead, affecting the performance of the application, especially in resource-constrained environments. Potentiality for over-engineering. In some cases, developers may over-engineer the application by adding unnecessary abstractions and layers, leading to bloated and hard-to-maintain code. Increased file count. MVC can result in a larger number of files and classes compared to simpler architectures, which may make the project structure more complex and harder to navigate. Conclusion. MVC architecture is a powerful design pattern that helps in developing maintainable and scalable applications. By separating concerns into multiple solid and flexible components, developers can build applications that are easier to understand, test, and extend. The MVC framework is a software architecture that separates the user interface, data storage, and business logic into three separate components. This allows developers to work on each component independently without affecting the other two parts of the application. The model can be reused across multiple views, and the same controller can be used with different views. This modular approach simplifies development, promotes code reuse, and improves overall productivity. The MVC design pattern is very flexible, extensibility, and the architecture can be maintained very easily. Thank you.